In my very first waitressing job, I had a regular. This was an older woman named Lily. Lily was very short. She was always very nicely dressed. You can picture her slowly walking in, always taking the same seat. And Lily actually never really spoke very much to anyone, although she would ask me repeatedly to refill her coffee. Lily drank a tremendous amount of coffee. But that's actually not why I remember her. Every day as Lily waited for her food to arrive, she would reach over to the center of the table where we kept a bowl of coffee creamers. She would slowly peel back the paper seal on the creamer, and then she would shoot it like a fine tequila. So as a teenager, you can see why this caught my attention. And by the way, Lily didn't just shoot one tequila. She would shoot all 5 or 6 of them, those coffee creamers, mind you, until the bowl was empty. This proved to be very educational for me after I turned 21. Okay, so this story makes a lot more sense if you understand that my first waitressing job was at an assisted living facility. Lily was a resident there. This is a true story. I did not make that up. And she had Alzheimer's disease. I loved that job. It was my first opportunity to work with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of my career in doing research to better understand the behaviors of people with Alzheimer's and how to care for them. So, we know that Alzheimer's is a devastating disease. First, we see damage to areas of the brain that are responsible for short-term memories. But if you've ever interacted with somebody with Alzheimer's, you know that they have a lot more than just serious memory problems. So depending on the stage of the disease that they're in and many other factors, sometimes we see changes in mood. People may look very agitated or worried. We'll see them pacing. Sometimes there's changes in personality. Some people become very aggressive. Sometimes they're paranoid or they wander. All of these kinds of symptoms are caused by further damage to other areas in the brain. And we know, in fact, that caring for somebody with dementia can be extremely difficult. And much of that difficulty is caused by these kinds of symptoms. They seem unpredictable, they seem illogical, and sometimes they just won't go away. So, how do we deal with these symptoms? Well, first, we need to understand that a person with dementia is not trying to be difficult. So if they ask you, what's for lunch, 6 times in 20 minutes, and in fact you just fed them lunch, I know that can be annoying, but I promise you they're not doing it because they're trying to be difficult. They're doing it because they have damage to areas of the brain responsible for short-term memories. Second, some of these behaviors actually might become logical if you start to think like a person with dementia. So if you didn't know where you were or who was in the room with you, you would probably also be very worried and agitated. That's a very normal reaction given that scenario. So if you think about it this way, sometimes the distress that you're seeing might be completely justified. Let's say Betty approaches you in a nursing home. She looks worried and she says to you, "I can't find my husband, he's supposed to meet me here." Now, in most cases, when we help people, we base our responses in reality. In this scenario, a reality-based response would be, "Betty, your husband died 3 years ago and you live here now." Think about that for a second. Betty assumes her husband is alive, she's looking for him. But with your response, you've not only told her that her husband has died, but that she's also lost her lifelong home. So is it any surprise that this kind of response is not going to make Betty feel better? In fact, it's almost always going to make things worse. So let's agree that we are not going to tell people with dementia bad news over and over again simply because it's the reality. Agreed? Thank you. So what is the right response here? The right response is to focus on Betty's emotions. Her reality, her facts are not real, but her emotions are real. So we respond to that. And we respond to that in the same way that we would respond to a friend or someone else that we know is going through those emotions. So if we think that Betty misses her husband, you would offer her some support. You acknowledge that she misses him. If that doesn't seem to work, think of the things that you might do if you miss somebody who is far away. You can sit down with Betty, you can actually help her write her husband a letter. You can put it in an envelope, you can stamp it, you can put it in the mail. It doesn't matter if the mailman has nowhere to take it, because that's not the point. If you think that maybe she's lonely, sit with her for a minute. Help her experience a human connection, because that's what helps with loneliness. If you think that she's scared, hold her hand. I know that when I'm scared, just having someone else present makes me feel better. And by the way, these kind of responses don't always have to be about helping people in distress. We can have some fun too. I bet all those years back, I probably could have made a connection with Lily. Do you remember Lily? Yeah, I knew you would. Okay. What if I had just sat down next to her like I was at a bar stool? I started cracking some jokes. I don't know if I would have gone as far as to start doing shots of coffee creamer, but maybe Lily was onto something. What do I know? Regardless, I think we both could have had some fun if I had at least tried to join the party. So we know that there is serious damage going on in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. What's pretty amazing, though, is that research has demonstrated that the ability to recognize emotional cues, so language, the emotional tone in language, or people's facial expressions, that's actually fairly well preserved in people with dementia. So yes, they may not know who you are, but they can look at you and how you're acting, and they can see if you're friendly. So imagine that a stranger approaches you. They don't make eye contact, they seem kind of irritated with you because you're moving slowly, or they just ignore you. How would you respond? You would probably be irritated, anxious, you might even retreat. That's an appropriate emotional response given that scenario. Now imagine a stranger approaches you, you don't know who they are, but they look you in the eye, they smile. How would you respond? Smile back, right? Okay, so my students and I did a research study this year where we did observations between persons with dementia living in a nursing home and staff. And what we found was that when there was no interaction between the staff and the client with dementia, the person with dementia would show positive behaviors, so smiling or showing interest in something, 36% of the time. When there was an interaction between the staff and the client, and this is a positive interaction, so the staff member was friendly, they helped them one-on-one with an activity, we saw positive behaviors in the person with dementia 81% of the time. So in other words, without any interaction at all, people with dementia could still experience some joy and some interest. But when somebody made an effort to have a friendly social connection, we saw much, much higher levels of joy and interest. So we know that Alzheimer's is devastating, but there is some good news here. The good news is that people with dementia can experience joy and humor and human connection. So let's focus on this. This can be our job as caregivers or family members or friends, not just to manage their behavior problems. Let's raise the bar higher. Let's help people experience joy and humor and human connection. One of my favorite memories at the assisted living facility occurred in July, and I remember this specifically, and you'll know why in a second. I approached a man named Bob with his lunch. Bob looked me in the eye, he smiled, and you know what he said? "Merry Christmas." And then Bob proceeded to get up, and he shuffled around the whole room. He said Merry Christmas to every single staff member there, and he shook their hand. It would have been ridiculous for us to say, "Bob, it's not Christmas. Christmas is 5 months away." The facts and the stories do not matter. What mattered was the emotion that he was experiencing, and Bob was experiencing joy, and he wanted to share that with people. So I remind you that while we do not yet have a cure for Alzheimer's disease, we can play a vital role in making people's moments better. We can understand that the facts and the stories that they're telling us are not nearly as important as the emotions that they're trying to express. And then we can respond to those emotions the same way that we would to a friend. We can have empathy. We can validate that their feelings are real. We can distract them for a while with something fun. And certainly we can provide some comfort. And maybe this isn't a bad idea for people without Alzheimer's. Let's try this out for a second. Let's think about the times in your life When you can make a real human connection, you can really truly help somebody if you minimize whether or not the facts and the reality are real. So if there's a child that wants the purple sippy cup and not the green one, or they're afraid of the dark, or you have a friend that's feeling insecure, does it really matter if their reality is real? Their emotions are real, and that's where we can help. We can have empathy. We can validate that their feelings are real. We can distract them for a few minutes with something fun, and certainly we can provide them some comfort. So, thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.